Good evening and welcome. Welcome to MEFA Matters in partnership with South Asian Heritage Month. For those of you who are new to Media for All, or MEFA as we call it, it's a social enterprise I founded back in 2018, really to help improve diversity and inclusivity within the media and advertising sector, which is where I spent 30 years of my career. MEFA is a profit, and our mission is really to help recruit Black, Asian and minority talent into media, and then help them rise and make sure we retain them in the sector. These conversations started post the murder of George Floyd. A lot of our members wanted to have conversations about race, lived experiences, and we've had probably about 30 of them since they started. And it's just wonderful. It's a nice way to learn, discuss, challenge, and just have an open debate in a safe space. South Asian Heritage Month first took place in 2020, runs from middle of July to middle of August each year, and they seek to commemorate, mark, and celebrate South Asian cultures, histories, and communities. It seeks to understand the diverse heritage and cultures that continue to link us all back with South Asia. South Asian Heritage Month is in its third year, and the theme for 2022 is Journeys of the Empire. This year marks 75 years since partition, and today our panel, we're calling it We Are Here Because They Were There. I'm joined by Dr. Binita Kane and Vikesh Amey Bhatt, and we'll be exploring the history of partition and the rippling effects of British colonialism, which has got us all back in the United Kingdom, really. So I just want to start by asking the panel to introduce themselves. Binita, would you like to go first?
Yes, so as Naren has said, I'm Dr. Binita Kane. I'm a respiratory doctor by background, but I'm co-founder of South Asian Heritage Month, and it's great to be here with MEFA.
Hey Naren, hey everybody out there. Lovely to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me on such a brilliant topic, and also something that we'll find out later on is really linked to what I've done recently. But hi, I'm Vikesh. I'm a creative director in advertising. I've been in advertising for close to 20 years now, and working for all sorts of brands out there, and just carving storytelling out there for lots of different types of brands. But you know, the biggest story that I have written recently is one that is really deep rooted into why we're all here, and we'll get onto that shortly. But yeah, thanks so much for inviting me along.
Thanks to both of you for coming, really. So Binita, I'm going to start with you. You featured in a BBC documentary, which was My Family's Partition and Me, which aired in 2017, and I'm kind of kicking myself for not watching it then, but I saw the clips over the last few weeks, and my God, I was so touched and moved by it. It was beautiful, listening to you and your dad, and also the other characters within it. And we're going to post a link in the show notes, so anybody out there who wants to kind of watch it, please do. But I'm kind of how'd you get here? You know, you're a consultant, and all of a sudden you're in a documentary, and now you've set up this amazing, organization, South Heritage Month. Talk us through how that happened, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those once in a lifetime opportunities that just came along out of nowhere, really. I mean, the backstory is that it's the same team that did Who Do You Think You Are, the program, and they had actually done a Who Do You Think You Are with Sinatra Saka, who's a really good family friend. And so when the producers were looking for families with stories, Leo Burley, who's the director, I think they had plenty of stories from the Punjab, but they very specifically wanted a story from Bengal, and even more specifically from Noakhali. So he said to the producer, find me a story from Noakhali, because it was one of the places where there was this huge genocide. And I think they contacted Sinatra's parents, who said, well, actually, I do know this fella, and that's my dad. So they approached him. He said, oh, I don't know about taking part in something like this, because it's digging up a lot of old wounds, and obviously it was very traumatic for my dad what he went through. But I just said, we can't not do this, Dad. We have to do this. So that's how it came about. It's just complete fortune, I think.
And what about then the South Asian Heritage Month, which you're now involved in? Kind of. Hello.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if it's my signal or yours, Naren. You're just breaking up a little bit. Vikesh, am I unstable, or is it Naren?
I think it's Naren. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
I think what you're asking is, how did the programme then lead on to South Asian Heritage Month? And I think, looking back, the experience that I had was just absolutely mind-blowing. I went from someone who was born and brought up in a very white area. I was brought up in North Wales. My heritage and my personal life was one thing, but then actually the rest of the time I just wanted to be like all the other white girls. I didn't really take that much heed of my heritage, and actually growing up, there's a lot of negativity associated with being different. So I didn't really embrace it in the way that perhaps I now feel I should have. And then going through school as well, no one really ever told me my history was important. It's just not taught, it's not talked about. So you go through life thinking, okay, well, I don't need to worry about that. And then I went on this journey. I was the first member of my family in 70 years to go back to that place where my father was born, where he had to flee at a very young age from the violence and the genocide that was going on, religious and ethnic cleansing. And I followed in the footsteps. And I met people from that time who remembered my family, which was just crazy. And there were so many things I learned. I mean, I knew my dad's story, but I didn't know that wider context and the sheer scale of partition, and the fact it was the biggest forced migration of humans in history. 15 million people displaced, a couple of million potentially died. All of that, I came back thinking, wow, it feels wrong that we don't talk about this more. And when the programme went out, very much that was the reaction from the British public. They used a lot of words like shame. I'm ashamed that this is our history and we don't talk about it. And that was coming from the white British population. And I think for the South Asians who watched it, it was very much about, gosh, I didn't know my grandparents and that generation went through this. And so I started a campaign around commemoration, firstly, because I thought, gosh, all those people died. This was a huge British story. It's astonishing when you actually look at the timescale of what happened. We don't even have a plaque to this. And people like my granddad died in the aftermath. And also education. I was like, this is really important that we teach our kids about this, that we know why we're here. And then I teamed up with Jasvir Singh in 2018, and we brought the celebration element as well. So our strapline, that's where South Asian Heritage Month was born, over a cup of tea with Jasvir. And the strapline is celebrate, commemorate, educate, to kind of encapsulate all of it. Glad you're back with us, Naren. Are you okay?
Yeah, no. Sorry, I don't know what happened, but I caught most of it. But it's fantastic what you've created, and kind of, I think, thank you from kind of all of us, really. It's wonderful to see, because we don't really have anything else like it, and so it's beautiful, really. So, I mean, in terms of Vikesh, I bought your book and it's arrived, and I loved it. I was gone, I wish I had it when my sons were growing up, because I would have kind of made them read it. But you're a creative person. How does someone like you all of a sudden go, I'm going to talk me through how that happened?
Yeah, thanks so much for that intro. I think, and I completely agree with you. I wish it was something that I had when I was growing up as a kid. And Binita, I think, some of the stuff, most of the stuff you said, just brought parallels in terms of how I grew up, and really sort of formed the basis of why with my wife we wrote this book, Land of the Belonging. So, you know, like you, Binita, like growing up, I didn't really know what I was doing in Britain. Like, why were there South Asians living in the UK? Sounds mad, right? Like, it's something that growing up and going through the UK education system, it seemed like it was never taught. You know, we learned about the Romans and the monarchy and World War, and strangely, these were intertwined with Britain, but never taught as well. So, as a summary, the book is a look at how past, present, and future India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and how Britain has always intertwined with one another. But to answer your question about, you know, how a creative director sort of took up, you know, taking this challenge on, you know, it was born out of conversations with my wife, really. You know, we were, you know, sitting down at dinner and you know, we'd have a couple of glasses of wine, and it would always come back to, you know, well, when I was growing up, I just didn't feel like I fitted in. You know, I didn't feel like there was really a place for me to really latch onto, you know, in terms of culture, because I had my culture at home, but the outside world culture was vastly different. And so as a kid, I really didn't know my context and my context of belonging. Because I ate Indian food at home. I spoke Gujarati with my parents. I had grandparents that flew over from Tanzania, and I knew that I was Indian, but I could never join the dots up in my head. You know, like, I'm British, but my relatives are in Africa, but we're Indian, and that triumphant of geolocations really didn't click until well later on in life, in terms of finding out about that seismic event, partition, and how it really then created this ripple effect of, you know, as you said, that instant migration of, you know, the uprooting and displacement of millions of people, and deaths that occurred from it, but also years after, you know, the movements of Asians around in the entire world. And that's not like an understatement. It's like the entire world has seen South Asians, you know, a knock-on effect of partition. So for me, there was such a wealth of backstory, of beautiful, of tragic, of colorful, of enriching Britain. All that backstory, I felt that should be taught and should be brought to the fore, but also brought to the fore in for children at entry level, because as I said, growing up in the UK, there was nothing like that. And just to sort of stop waffling on, I'll stop at some point, but you know, in my industry, and it's probably in lots of different types of industry now, people talk about diversity. And I think it's too late at that professional level to be talking or approaching that subject of diversity, if I'm being brutally honest. And I think, you know, if we can tackle, you know, the idea of diversity at an entry level, at an earlier level, then that takes us one step closer to normalizing diversity and removing those boundaries in the professional spaces where issues may arise, such as, you know, racism, you know, institutionalized racism and conflicts in that respect, and pay and those sorts of issues. So the book is, you know, it is a children's book, and it is entry level, and it touches on, you know, the serious side of what happened, and also the enriching side of what happened as well, in terms of, you know, how Britain adopted the beautiful things of you know, South Asians being here, from curry to less obvious things like, you know, language, like pundits and shampoo and things like that, you know, to architecture, to the arts, to, you know, celebrities like Riz Ahmed, and politicians, and whether we like them or not, potentially maybe the next prime minister, you know. So the book is, yeah, as I said, without laboring the point, an entry level book, and it really is this sort of euphoric, you know, celebration of why we are here, what we have done, and the beautiful things that have come out of it. And I think that for me as a kid would have been so powerful to have, and would have really grounded me and made me feel like I belonged. Because believe it or not, I have lots of cousins that live, around the UK, and they still feel like the outsiders, and I feel like this book is going that step further to show that it isn't us and them. It's, Britain and being British is very much, full of, it is South Asian. It is that intertwined history and that intertwined right now.
Yeah, but Binita and I were talking about this when we first met, because there comes a time in your life, and it happened to me, I think probably in my 30s, when all of a sudden I was just like, right, I've got to start reading stuff to understand, how did 100,000 Britishers rule over the Indian subcontinent? It's mind-boggling. Yeah, and I think different people get it early, but you're right. If I had it earlier, it would have just made life easier, really. But let's go back into history now. And the thing that astounded me when I first started kind of reading about Britain and India was the fact that a company initially, was the entry point. The British East India Company, they were they were a limited company, just like, I don't know, British Tobacco, or could have been them, and they took over nearly all of India. How did that happen?
Well, hang on. Well, yeah, it's hard to fathom that, a company could take over a country, and that sort of, once we get around that, it's almost like Google owning a country. They probably do actually, but what happened was, it was quite simple. They arrived. They played to the fact that India was a very civilized place. It had lots of rulers and lots of people that could make change. But in fact, India was very disconnected as well, in terms of some rulers may own parts of India and small amounts of people, but other rulers might have larger areas. So the East India Company very cleverly grabbed the ear of these people, of these villagers, and these Maharajas as well, and really bent their ear a little bit. And when their ears weren't bent, and when they weren't convincing them, they were using force as well. So it wasn't taken by sort of by conversation and amicable. Sometimes it was a forceful negotiation.
And kind of, so that went on for several years, and then all of a sudden the British government took over the British East India Company. Why did that happen?
Well, I think it was all down to trade, right? It was all about what can the UK get out of India and really extract the elements from it, from the spice and that sort of trade, textile trade as well. And so the UK government felt that it was India was always, if it wasn't this is what I found out, if it wasn't taken over by the British, it would have been the Dutch. It was such a jewel in the East that it was looked at as the next thing to have. It was so wanted, but the sophistication of the British and the way they went about, as I said, slowly hijacking the sort of the smaller communities, and then with force, and then obviously that then became such a fertile trade that the UK government became collaborates in that sort of farm.
You've got a beautiful drawing within your book where you show the different countries, Australia, New Zealand, and then you've got, of course, the Far East and India, and of course then the North America, and if you could see that, you kind of envisage why they did it, really. But what about, you'd mentioned the Maharajas, and one of the things I kind of read up was like a third of them, these princely states, were never really occupied by the British. How did they kind of coexist? Because you hear about all these wonderfully rich people who used to come to the UK and meet our royal family, and how did they exist with Britain?
Well, I think there was obviously with the Maharajas, like there was certainly a tantalizing aspect of interacting with the UK, with Britain, right, and having that direct dialogue with the Queen. And I think that the Maharajas played up to that. There was gifts exchanged as well. It wasn't just take by the British. The Maharajas would gift Queen Victoria shawls and riches and spices and portraits and things like that. And so there was certainly an exchange from Britain and India, especially with this more stately Maharajas.
Yeah, and I kind of, in my head, I'm kind of going, if they all got together, they probably could have kicked the British out, and it's just quite sad if you think about it that way. And in terms of, we kind of go, whatever it is, 200 years, and we're kind of in the 1940s now, and, Britain are itching to get out of India. Kind of what happened, we were the jewel of the crown and, all that sort of stuff. And why did Britain want to get out?
Well, I think it's down to the fact that there was sort of internal conflicts going on, internal arguments, and there was clearly post First War, like there was certainly a bit of unrest as well within the country. There was a shift of power, and for us, when we researched the book, it was really the coming of post war of the British really losing the grip on India, and India really starting to feel like they can really hold their own. And it was such a quick, for the amount of time that Britain had been within India, such a quick ejection. The plan was drawn up very quickly to get out.
It is, kind of all the stuff I've read, it was supposed to be over a year, and then it ended up being a few months. Benita, what do you know about kind of if you're thinking about splitting up a country, what do you know about the time it took, or what was the methodology? You'd have thought that somebody would have spent a great deal of time on something like this.
I said earlier, it's such an astonishing story that it's amazing it's actually not taught, and it's a really good example of how not to do things. So the actual decision, Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India, he actually announced that the continent was going to split and partition was going to happen on the 3rd of June. And the 18th of July, which is when South Asian Heritage Month starts, was when King George VI gave his royal assent to it happening. And then the 17th of August, which is the end of South Asian Heritage Month, is the date that Sir Cyril Radcliffe, who was the British barrister lawyer who was taken over to India to draw the lines of the borders for East and West Pakistan, that's when it was announced. So from the 3rd of June to the 17th of August, the whole thing in less than 10 weeks was done and dusted. And the really incredible thing was Sir Cyril Radcliffe had never apparently been to India before. He knew nothing about the communities. And it's said that a few days after the Radcliffe lines were published, he destroyed all his documents and left and never went back. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I've been told by a historian. So perhaps, and then the impact of that is kind of still reverberates around the world. 75 years later, it still impacts our communities in Britain. It still impacts India and Pakistan. It still impacts diaspora across the world. And it's still, it's still border disputes in Kashmir. It's incredible how those decisions that were done in such a short space of time have had that lasting legacy, and a lot of it isn't good.
No, and I guess it's who made the decision? I'm assuming it was voted in Parliament here at the end, or because what was the process?
Vikesh, go on.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump on to Binita's point about the lines. I mean, and the ridiculous fact that he had never been to India before, and also just how he judged where the line would go, and in terms of like family numbers and livestock, and it was such a crazy metric in terms of classifying people, and absolutely, like, it was such a radical drawing of the line that even to this day, when I jump into a cab, people are saying, "Are you Indian or Pakistan? Like, Pakistan, are you Hindu or Muslim?" It's like, it's still there. It's still bolted into people's, like, that. It sounds ridiculous, but that line drawing has really affected like everything.
I think for me as well, when I went to Bangladesh, so it's Bangladesh now, but when my dad was born there, it was East Bengal. And of course, half of Bengal is in India and half is now in what was Bangladesh, was East Pakistan back in 1947. And when I went back to Bangladesh, even though it felt like a very alien sort of country to me, I'd never been before. It was, I'm Hindu by background. It was a Muslim country. So it felt very different, but actually I could understand the language. The food felt incredibly familiar. And I was kind of like, well, we're all Bengalis at the end of the day. And it doesn't matter whether you're on this side or that side of the border. And that was really quite powerful, because even though it was a different country, I still felt that shared heritage, that we're all from that same background. And I think that's part of what we try and encapsulate in South Asian Heritage Month. Is South Asia is so diverse. There's 8 different countries. There's different religions, there's different backgrounds. There's all manner of diversity, which should be celebrated and is beautiful. But at the same time, we can speak as one voice because we do have that shared heritage. So that's kind of part the essence we've tried to capture with the campaign.
And I mean, Binita, we know your grandfather's and your father's story about all of a sudden leaving in the middle of the night, and did it only happen in areas around the border? Is that where most of the movement took place, or were people moving out of Bombay and Delhi as well? I mean, how? Because again, in the documentary, from what I was watching, it seemed to be areas concentrated around the borders. But I'm assuming people from Gujarat and they left as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I suppose what isn't really clear in the documentary is that my dad's story was actually in the run-up to partition. So there was a lot of violence that was incited in the cause of wanting a separate homeland. Yeah. And what was really interesting is when I met people who were in their 90s, who remembered my family, which was just kind of mind-blowing, who talked about a time when the Hindus and Muslims in the village where they lived side by side, they ate together and they sang together, and there was no animosity internally. And in fact, there was still a Hindu temple there next to the Muslim places of worship as well. And it was actually external forces. It was a coordinated, planned attack that was politically incited that sparked that. So I think when I learned about the basics of partition, whenever it was, a long time ago, people use the word riots, like people just went mad and started killing each other. But actually, there was a very, very political element to this. It was coordinated. You apparently couldn't buy kerosene in the area for 3 or 4 months in advance because it was being stockpiled. And then it was on the day of the Lucky Puja that they went in and started slaughtering the Hindus. But the amazing part of my story is that it was a Muslim family that sheltered. You know, it was one of my granddad's Muslim friends who risked their own life in the middle of the night. They would have been killed on if anyone had discovered they were smuggling a Hindu family out. And so, as well as all the violence, there were also these incredible stories of neighbours sheltering neighbours. And I think that's really been lost in the narrative because the trauma and the killing and the hatred is passed down, and we've kind of lost that narrative around the shared heritage, which is really important. But going back to your question, I think Vikesh might be better asking this, because I mean the mass migration was just in all directions, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't sound like it was like, you know, one-way traffic. It was, you know, the lines basically told people to get up and move and move en masse. And, you know, that stat you said earlier, you know, it was the biggest land migration of human beings. You know, that's unfathomable, you know, to this day. You know, like how can you do that? You know, it's crazy.
I've struggled to find anywhere in everything I've read where either, you know, Jinnah or Nehru or Mountbatten envisaged this big movement of people. I think it took them all totally by surprise. I think they all thought most of the Sikhs and Hindus would continue to live in Pakistan, and there'd be Muslims living in kind of areas. There's still millions of Muslims living in India, but especially around the border areas. And I just don't think anyone foresaw it. I mean, how could they?
Yeah, I mean, it was such an audacious, you know, fantastical plan that, you know, it's never been done before and never will be done again, right?
Okay.
It's such a, yeah, it was a concept that, you know, I mean, the categorization of who someone is, and then the lines drawing up. It sounds like someone made it up, you know.
No, I guess the other thing that I kind of came across, I think it was mentioned in the documentary as well, Binita, that you were in, was the British kind of stepped aside at this time in terms of when the riots were taking place. You know, the army wasn't allowed. You know, they were basically told not to engage. Why do you think that was?
Difficult question to answer. I mean, if you look at what's happened in Afghanistan with American troops and British troops just upping and leaving, and then the chaos that ensues as you just sort yourselves out. I don't know is the answer. I don't know enough about it to understand how or why that happened. I don't know if Vikesh has got maybe some more insights, but
no. I mean, you could perhaps draw parallels to, you know, Afghanistan and places like that in terms of, you know, limited forces, you know, less of a focus, pulling your resources right back. You know, why would you have people there, you know, helping, you know, manage the migration when, you know, your plan is only by exiting?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it's just some sort of responsibility. I mean, they still control the army. You know, they were, and this is again really, you know, pre-partition when a lot of the riots started, and it's just really surprising that they didn't step in. And, you know, if they'd stepped in, like the initial riots that happened in Lahore, there was no reaction to it.
Yeah, I wonder if because Britain had endured such heavy losses in the Second World War, whether that played into it as well, because they're already very diminished in terms of young men and workforce and army and everything. So who knows? I'm sure there are historians out there who'd know.
Yeah, who could probably help us.
Who could help us out.
And I mean, I guess going on to Bangladesh, which, what happened there? I mean, why did, Pakistan break up it, into Bangladesh? If, just, kind of from your point of view.
So again, something that maybe people don't have a lot of knowledge of is that East Pakistan, which is what, when they split Bengal, that's what was created, became Bangladesh in 1971 after another war of independence, where potentially up to 3 million people were killed in that as well. And that 1971, that's like in my brother's lifetime. It was so recent. And I don't know a huge amount about that time, but and what happened, but I do know that we don't talk about it. And there were horrendous crimes that were committed at that time in a similar vein to what happened in 1947. And the fallout from that is still being felt in terms of refugees in that area. And again, I just think it's history that nobody's really proud of, because when you look at partition, World War II is easy to sort of teach, isn't it? Because there's goodies and baddies, and Hitler was a baddie and we won. And that's really easy and a nice narrative to teach your children. But actually, when you look at what's happened with partition, when you look what's then happened since then and the independence of Bangladesh, it's nobody comes out of it looking very good. And so we shy away from it. And there were victims on all sides, and there were people at fault on all sides. And so it's difficult to teach and it's difficult to talk about. So when I've been looking at all the curriculum stuff, it's not that you can't teach it, it's that it's not taught. And when you look at the reasons behind that, it's because the teachers haven't been taught. So there's a train the trainer issue. And there's also this kind of issue of that our curriculum just looks back at things with rose-tinted spectacles, and we pick and choose what we want to teach. So it gets really quite complex when you scratch beneath the surface of all of that. But anyway, I've digressed a bit from the original.
Listen, I just think the fact that no one spotted that you were creating a country which was, East and West Pakistan with India in the middle, with totally, although there were Muslim majorities, the cultures were so different, and I mean, it's bizarre that someone didn't go, this just looks very wrong. But just going back to, I mean, and it's something that kind of I kind of struggle with in terms of, if we kind of, 75 years on, right? And you've got Pakistan, you've got Bangladesh, you've got India, and one of the key reasons Jinnah wanted a separate state was he was worried about Muslims not having the same rights as Hindus. And we now have Modi, and we now have Islamophobia on the rise in India. Do you sometimes think, okay, maybe the British got it part right, or was there a bit of truth in their madness, or how do you feel about it?
It's such a big question. I don't know. I think it was just a big seismic, event that, I wouldn't want to say yes or no, but I think, the reason why I'm here today is because of it, and so part of it has spawned brilliance and excellence and enriched the world, but part of it, as Binita said, like, lots of people, and that's not an understatement, lots of people died, and the ripples there have been negative ripples since. So it was a very tough question to answer.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that there were many people within India who wanted an independent homeland, wanted Pakistan, and that actually there was very strong celebrations when partition happened as well. And it's important not to forget that it was the will of a number of, a proportion of people that they wanted that. But I just think my personal view is when you look back at the history and you look at how when Britain arrived, they started sowing the seeds of division. I mean, it's a very well-known policy, divide and rule, and division sows fear. It allows you to control people, and so I think the roots of how and why it happened are not good, because I think whenever you create anything based on sowing fear and division, it's not a good thing. It's my personal view, a bit like Vikesh's. It's really bittersweet, because had it not happened, I probably wouldn't be here. And but then you look back and you look at how terrible it was, and my dad ended up as a complete penniless refugee, complete pauper, starving. My granddad died. Terrible hardships.
Yeah. Or I guess if anything, it would have been, I guess, if the Indian nation was created and all of the Indian subcontinent made that decision themselves. I mean, there's still states being created in India, every few years there's a new state. But no, it's a tough question. But anyway, let's move on into kind of when did Indians start arriving in the UK? Vikesh, Binita.
Binita, you can start, and then I can just add bits and bobs in if you think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is all stuff I've learned in the last 5 or 6 years since I've sort of decided to educate myself. There's some really great comments coming up in the chat, so if we may, Naren, in a bit, I might flash some of them up and it might stimulate a bit more discussion. But I think I learned about the British Nationality Act in 1948, which then, Britain was broke after the war. It didn't have a workforce. It needed to rebuild the country. The NHS was just at its inception, and we needed workers. So people were encouraged to come to Britain as citizens. So there were these big waves of migration then partition happened in the late 40s. So in the 50s, 60s and 70s, these huge waves of migration where people were welcomed as citizens. And so many of them took jobs as the doctors and in many of those industries. But then also there were people who took the jobs that nobody else wanted to do, and they lived in terrible conditions and faced awful racism. But I mean, South Asians have been in Britain for a lot longer than that. You can go back a couple of centuries, and I think the first curry house was in the 1800s or something. So it didn't all start with partition, but I think that was when the major waves of migration happened. And again, a lot of people don't know that the Windrush generation also consisted of South Asians who had been taken all over the world as indentured labourers, and then the twice migrants, the thrice migrants, the other Windrush generation, but they all came here as citizens. And it's fascinating when you learn about that. And I'm slightly ashamed and embarrassed I didn't really know all of that until quite recently.
And Vikesh, sorry, I learned about the color bar in your book. I mean, I never knew. Tell us what was the color bar? I mean, I was quite shocked when I read it, to tell the truth.
Yeah. The color bar was essentially zones of places where it was deemed illegal or not appropriate for people of color to be at, and that was the shocking fact, is that still was around as early as late as the sort of early 80s. So it still was sticking around.
It kind of sounds a bit like apartheid to me, but I mean, we talked about especially the people who came after World War II, and there's a lot talked about the doctors, but it's the factory workers. I mean, they're all scattered all over the country, and they would have had really tough lives, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, look, within the book we touch on this, right? It wasn't a seamless integration, right? When people came over to work, as Binita said, into that sort of diverse sort of workforce and helped Britain. Britain at the end of the war was a mess. It was a crumbling place, and the fact there was advertising campaigns in India and across the Commonwealth to come to galvanize the workforce to come to Britain and to help rebuild it. And and that, you know, as we mentioned, across the NHS and across, you know, factory and textiles and across, you know, multiple industry sectors to come home effectively and rebuild it. But as you say, like this wasn't seamless, this wasn't frictionless, you know, the color bar being one of those things, but also, like, you know, we talk about, you know, racism and I don't want to use the word riots, but uprising as well, you know, like the places like the Southall riots, and, you know, and there were things that happened that were terrible, you know, that made life difficult. You know, my mum was actually on the front line on the Southall uprising. She went out and, you know, I remember a story that she told me quite recently where she said, I put you and your 3 brothers down to bed and left your dad at home, and I went out and went front line marching. And I think that's just like, you know, that's pretty badass, you know, and you know, and complete respect to my mum for doing that. But, you know, to not to labor the point, you know, this all this stuff was what happens when you bring this surge of people to an alien country, you know. But it shows, you know, that if I'm looking back at it now, I'm not sort of trying to forget that, but I'm showing, like, that has, you know, at that early age, you know, hearing that sort of stuff, and now where we are right now, it shows that we've come so far. You know, we've risen, and we've almost conquered Britain ourselves, you know.
Yeah, and I think you know, the other wave which came when, you know, Amin kicked all the Indians, the people of Asian backgrounds out of Uganda.
Yeah,
it kind of all happened again, and I know a lot of my friends, they came after. My wife is a refugee, and once again, I mean, terrible hardship. I mean, people, you had 20 people living in a house, and, you know, again, you know,
but
neighbors complaining.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo that point, I mean, again, it's like, how did Indians end up in Africa, and then how did they end up in the UK? Like, it's those dots that I feel are completely lost in the narrative. You know,
Yeah.
To this day, I still sort of, you know, I've got 2 young boys now, and this book that we wrote is for them, because it allows them to join the dots up, and it allows them to start their narrative knowing exactly the bigger, broader narrative, you know. And it's those conversations about Africa and those sort of nuanced narratives that have powered, again, that it hasn't necessarily been like from India to Britain. It's been from India to Africa to Britain. It's that, well, sort of.
It's all over, and hopefully I've got some work coming on it. So I'm writing I'm helping write a book about the whole thing around indentureship, which is kind of what happened post-slavery. Britain still needed workers to work on sugar mills, so they moved 2 million Indians out of India, and that's why you've got Vijay Singh, world championship golfer, who comes from Fiji, or VS Naipaul, who comes from Trinidad. But hopefully we could do that chat next year. I'm just worried about time. Binita, do you want to kind of touch on any of the questions that have come through the chat, or?
Yeah, there's some really interesting comments that are coming through. So this is one I'd not heard before. That once a Maharaja had a custom Rolls Royce delivery and made them wait outside the gates for a month. Now, I mean, I think the incredible opulence of the Maharajas, but also the British Raj, you know, something to behold, really, isn't it? I mean,
well, they paid 25% tax to the British for protection. That's how the Maharajas and the princely states worked. But what they ended up doing was hiding a lot of their income, so they didn't have to pay the tax. So that's why they had a lot of money in Swiss banks, really. So, no, I think. Go on. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm just going to say this is quite an interesting point, because we only know what we're told, and I think depending on who you speak to about this history, you will get a different version of the truth, and that's why these oral these oral story kind of preservation projects like the 1945 partition archive and others who do incredible work preserving the stories are so important. And why? Because when we're looking at schools, we're not just looking at it through a history lens, we're looking at it through storytelling, through drama, through geography, through different subjects where you can explore the complexities of it. And there is actually going to be a documentary that's coming out in August. I can't say too much about it because I don't think it's been announced yet, but it's going to be really fascinating. It's going to look at how partition happened from the different perspectives of the key people who were involved. So if you keep an eye on our socials, you'll see more about that.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I think it's always interesting when I speak to my Pakistani friends, you know, their view of partition is very different people from India, and everyone blames each other. And actually, the key thing we just need to have is have a conversation about it and talk it through. And unfortunately, there was only a lot of loss that happened as a result of it, really. And maybe then celebrate the fact that we're all here now.
And this is a really important point as well about kind of how do we feel about it and how it came about. And the underlying intentions were not for the benefit of the people. And I think we can all relate to that around another certain split that's happened in recent years, 2016. Let's not go there, but it's true. I think it's politics that drives these things rather than actually the will of the peaceful communities.
Well, I think we should try and wrap. But I mean, I think one of the things, I went to university in the States, in Florida actually, and I never envisaged that there'd be a black man would ever be president of the United States. And I still remember the moment it was announced, and I kind of stopped in my tracks. And of course, we've got young Rishi, whose family originates from East Africa. What do you think the chances are of somebody from an Asian background being prime minister, or at least maybe in the next 20 years, if it's not Rishi now?
And I think regardless of your politics and what you think of the current people in the cabinet, the fact that there are not just one, there's at least 3 South Asians in the cabinet is really quite extraordinary. And the fact that someone from a South Asian background is in running to be prime minister, regardless of your politics, that's a great moment for South Asian people in this country. And it's those glass ceilings are hopefully getting smashed as time goes on. And Barack Obama, again, I think we all remember where we were when he was voted in. Incredible moment. So things are changing. And I think the George Floyd movement and the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 was another key turning point. You've mentioned it stimulated some of what you're doing. I think I've certainly noticed in the last couple of years, people are soul searching a lot more. People who weren't interested in diversity are really educating themselves and wanting to come on board, wanting to be allies. And we're seeing much more from a national level as well about addressing inequalities. And we've got a long way to go, but I think it's all good.
Yeah, the direction of travel is great.
Yeah.
Vikesh, anything to add before we end?
No, I think I grew up and I saw many politicians, many people of power being of a particular look, and now you look whether that's the top of the top of the country who's ruling that, to the top of the charts, to the top of picking up a Golden Globe, or picking the people that are top architects. It's amazing right now how the partition, the ripples of partition, and what that's done for this sort of exciting wave of as you say, there is no glass ceiling anymore. It's well and truly broken, and for young kids to see that across any sort of sector, you can lead, you can drive change, and you can be, you can genuinely have an impact in Britain where you belong. I think that's such a powerful time to be alive.
Thank you. So I think I just want to say thanks. I'm going to start with you, Vikesh. Thanks for coming here, but more importantly, thanks for being brave and writing that wonderful book. And these things are incredibly difficult to do. And thanks, Binita, for appearing in that documentary, and really kind of I did have tears rolling down my cheeks throughout it. But even after that, kind of creating this wonderful organization, I think it's fantastic. So big thanks to both of you. And I think on that note, let's all say goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks.